Hello again. It's been a while since I've done a video, and what sort of happened is I'm going to be spending far more of my free time on a quite a long and deep study into private assets and the corruption that rests behind that, which I'll touch on a little bit. But whilst I've been sort of gearing up to that, which is kind of reaching quite an important stage, I've been sort of monitoring the Jess Staley case, the hearing in the upper tribunal, and it kind of brought back a lot of issues around integrity and the duality of how that is interpreted by the FCA, and it sort of prompted me to think about making a video to wrap all this up in terms of the do as we say, not do as we do approach to integrity. And one of my favourite pieces of music is Wagner's Ring Cycle, and I've named this video Night Falls on the Gods because I want to tie up everything and explain why I took some of the action and some of the terms, and also I had sort of tried as a good will gesture. The FCA asked for some apologies, and in the context of how they let clients down and how that's had a bad human impact, and also what I describe or interpreted even is acts of intimidation and coercion towards myself. They haven't really shown any willingness to do that, so it's entirely up to them. So it's another reason really why the video felt necessary as I move on to the next chapter, what I do in my spare time, and that's going to be around private assets. And again, I'll touch on that. The first issue that struck me with the Staley case, which they've based heavily around integrity, in terms of suggesting that he didn't act with integrity. He's obviously challenged that, and he has his own view. The first thing that struck me is whether the correct questions were asked. Now, the issue seems to rest around to what extent he was close to Mr. Epstein. Now, the problem with concepts such as close is a very subjective term. Trying to understand firstly in what capacity a person might be considered as close, and another one would be it's very subjective in terms of people would say we are close, another person would say we're not close. It's a judgment. It's almost like an emotional judgment, and you've got to try to determine in what subjectivity that in judgment applies, whether it's professional, personal, both, everything. And again, that will vary in accordance to how different people perceive it. And for instance, if you were to look at persons now working with or for the UK government in very senior roles, you could argue, depending on how subjected you want to be on that term, close, that certain other people could have been close or said to have been close to Jeffrey Epstein. And really, I think one issue that really should have been asked is, they probably should have asked, was Mr. Staley aware of any wrongdoing carried out by Mr. Epstein, and was Mr. Staley part of any wrongdoing by Mr. Epstein? Now, I'm not aware, unless I'm mistaken, in which case I would apologise, that it's ever been suggested by the FCA that Mr Staley was aware of any wrongdoing by Mr Epstein or took part in any wrongdoing by Mr Epstein. Now, this is very interesting because if you look at the historic relationship, if you like, between Mr Staley and the FCA, that there'd been issues of a contention before this case. So there'd been some, almost what you might think as some animosity, that you might look upon it like that. And it's also, as to why they would ask the question, were you close, instead of did you know of any wrongdoing, did you partake in that? Because it's very different in how you would judge the integrity of a person by asking that question, one or the other. And it's also very interesting in the tactics deployed by the FCA and the barrister they chose. Now, the barrister that they did choose is actually come across her in the study into private assets, and so she's known to us. But the methods she used were very, very quite aggressive in terms of really trying to make him feel very uncomfortable in terms of his personal life. And you again, what he does in his personal life in terms of his relationship situation with his wife and family doesn't make him a bad person. It doesn't mean he is unsuitable for to work in financial services, for instance. And it interested me, both in terms of the key question they chose to base their lack of integrity that he allegedly showed, the narrowness of that question, and the tactics they used when he chose to challenge this and come over from America to clear his name. And I found that really, really interesting. I want to now focus on the issue of integrity again, now with reference to the WealthTek case. And I want to tidy up some issues, really. As I explained, the major theme throughout these series of videos and the book Lost to the Races has been this conflict of interest that's embedded in the regulator-prosecutor model, and how this delivers bad outcomes for the victims of financial scandals and also, in my opinion, society as a whole. In this regard, I've demonstrated that the FCA malfeasance and the charges made against John, brought against John, are two sides of the same coin, because you cannot really understand the allegations without framing that in the context of extraordinary failures, catastrophic failures, a whole catalogue of them, under the general term malfeasance of the FCA, and the conflicts of being a regulator and being seen to have protected consumers appropriately, and being a prosecutor. So please see videos 2 and 3 for details of the warnings given to the FCA back in July 2021. I provided them with 2 distinct avenues for investigation: the audit all the cash flows between the regulated bit and the LLPs, which is what BDO have done, and the other one being just turn up and ask where the £250 million plus assets that the claim was that Vertum Asset Management were managing, where they were. Just turn up and say, please, can you just verify where they are, show us where they are. And to put that in the context, it was quite important because I knew that the largest client had left, and these figures were significantly inflated, in my opinion. And to put that into further context, when I think from memory, when WealthTek was placed in special administration, I think the gross assets of the platform were something like about 232 million. Now that was including Vertum, Mallet Melville and other third parties. So you can see the degree of inflation that my concerns were. So it was a very easy case to have intervened in 2021 and potentially prevented a lot of further harm to consumers. Now, on the matter of integrity, in the context of these conflicts of interest that I've alluded to, that reside between the regulator prosecuting models, I want to return to the following issues. And one is I've covered this extensively in the book and these videos, is the infamous Therese Chambers "Do the Right Thing" speech on June 2023. As I've evidenced, this was a disingenuous attempt to mislead the public and the victims of the WealthTek scandal. The FCA acted expediently to protect consumers from serious harm. Now, that is clearly not the case, given what we've been through in this series of videos. Now, I would argue here Therese Chambers, an experienced professional, failed to act with integrity. So Therese Chambers, in essence, endorsed the FCA's policy of do as we say, not do as we do, in the context of integrity. Now, note the description where I pasted in some narrative. And here we have a further example of Therese Chambers behaving in a duplicitous way in terms of the way she describes the FCA's actions. So upon charging John, you'll see in the text, she tries to almost rejoice that the FCA have sought to keep the victims of the WealthTek scandal up to date. This, again, it's my opinion, but it's a rather shameless attempt at misleading the public. Throughout the process, and BDO operated what really was quite an opaque creditors committee that left lots of victims who were locked out of their savings and in need of income and so on, very much disenfranchised from the process. And both myself and others spent an awful lot of time trying to help them, trying to source information to give them something to keep them as updated as we could. The idea that the FCA did all they could is it really is extraordinary, extraordinarily disappointing, and I would use the term quite shameless. I know clients who have complained to the FCA about this, both about the Do the Right Thing speech and Chambers' subsequent comments on trying to keep clients up to date. I'm not aware that anybody has received any substantive explanation for these remarks. Now, also we need to consider that there are issues around Nikhil Ratty in terms of his coordinated narrative with the government in terms of the response to the all-party parliamentary group report, and brushing it off as not relevant and historic. Ratty engaged in the media round, making words to comments to that effect, and I've identified in other videos, Tulip's treadmill and one other, that this wasn't this was another attempt to mislead the public, because there are issues around the WealthTek case that chime very strongly with the all-party parliamentary group reporting to the FCA and their concerns. There are big commonalities, and so to dismiss the reporters historic and irrelevant is extremely disingenuous, and it's quite a brazen attempt at misleading, and again extremely disappointing for what you'd expect from a regulator. Now, I don't suppose in the context of Therese Chambers reading Dick Francis novels would naturally extend to reading the Iliad, although I do note Ratty's references to Greek mythology, so I will try to indulge him. Now, we can continue on this path of obfuscation and trying to mislead, and in the context of this hierarchy of greed which I've spoken about, which is the priority is to maintain the reputation of the regulator, remuneration of legal professionals, and right at the bottom, the welfare of the victims, so the inversion of morality and how time is used to serve that purpose. But bringing the gender dynamics up to date, there are Erinese on their shoulders, and they're with them step by step. And I would strongly encourage the FCA to do the right thing and be truthful and honest with people, and stop hiding behind the gross perversion of prejudice, because the Erinese are very persistent. Now let us turn to FCA investigator Jennifer Hepworth. Hepworth was the first investigator who contacted me after the embarrassment of the Times article written by Jonathan Ames, which revealed that they would be given graphic warnings or issues of concern about WealthTek which weren't acted upon, hence the videos 2 and 3. Now, Hepworth tried to patch this embarrassment and why it took her 6 months to contact me, the whistleblower, into this blisteringly fast investigation. Initially, she tried to, when I asked her about this question, she initially tried to placate me with her impressive 10 seconds of detailed research, which it would have taken to have identified me as a person of interest. You would really just had to type in Collingwood Wealth LLP and that would have been done. No, what Hepworth tried to do is to hide behind confidentiality, saying that in essence the whistleblowing was subject to the FCA's brackets on intelligence operation, and was not made available to her as a senior investigator 6 months into an investigation because of confidentiality. But again, that just doesn't ring true, because I gave an example in another video that as a serious crime suspected, the police would come, they would identify persons of interest, suspects, and they would do a massive sweep on information and get as much information on these people as possible, and that would be all the organisation. There would be no confidentiality. And if you can keep a straight face at this point, Hepworth then sort of dug herself into another hole in many respects, because what Hepworth had failed to recognise is that I had long since waived my rights to confidentiality, and I've pasted in the email narratives about that. And I'd made it clear to the FCA that I placed the integrity of the industry above my own anonymity. So unfortunately, it's again disingenuous, I'm afraid, and shows a lack of integrity. There is something else, whilst I'm here, that I'd like to expand upon with Hepworth, is after the FCA's recordings had ceased during my compelled interview, Hepworth sought to, I guess, apply, the way I interpreted it was apply in a little bit of a clumsy fashion, some threats and intimidation towards me in trying to push me into providing a witness statement, which I'd said that I was unwilling to do because of these issues around conflicts of interest and integrity. And again, I would have interpreted this. My interpretation at the time was it was a form of, I suppose you'd say, witness intimidation, but in my case, potential witness intimidation. And also, this was certainly followed up by Anthony Williams in the dialogue that I've enclosed in the description here. So if you see the narrative that I pasted in here, and look very closely, I'll return to this point, but look very closely at the words he uses in terms of me not being willing to provide a witness statement. Hepworth also tried to intimidate me in saying, warning me against conducting my own investigation. Was the way it was put to me, and at this point I'd reminded her that I wasn't investigating John. That is their job, but that really hadn't gone that much beyond the warnings I'd given, and in essence, if I was investigating things, I was investigating the impact of FCA malfeasance and its impact on the victims of the WealthTek scandal. But as you can imagine, that was very poorly received. There were other instances of intimidation, actually, and in one of the breakout sessions, I was sat reading emails on my phone, and Hepworth's colleague Richard Middleditch made what I again interpreted to be a veiled threat whilst I was sat reading emails in the foyer area of the hotel in Newcastle. And again, I interpreted it on the lines of do not investigate, or us, it, whatever. That's the way I interpreted it. And again, what I reiterated to Hepworth was I was interested in the issues of integrity, malfeasance, and the impact that I'd had on the victims. The intimidation continued beyond this, as you can see from the narrative posted in the description, how Anthony Williams sought to apply pressure as I had declined to provide a witness statement. And again, look very closely at his words. Williams, in my opinion, made a very big mistake here. It still could have been redeemed, but by becoming quite bellicose and making me feel like I was subject to intimidation, he made the situation a good deal worse. On the private assets stuff, which has been running for quite a while, which I'm going to pivot onto a lot more now, hence what I spoke of at the start. One of my associates on that was actually a colleague of sorts of Williams in the past, and so we knew a bit about him and what to expect. I now invite you to look at the video disorderly response, which I deconstructed, an email that was sent by the FCA by a person called Duncan Alger after I appeared on a transparency book club review, and what I interpreted this as is it was rather like I suppose you'd call it a little bit like a crude psyop, where Alger was seeking to intimidate me via the pincer movement of prejudice and non-cooperation. And notice Williams, it tried to do something a little bit similar. But again, I think this also was quite a serious mistake, and I did ask for an apology for this approach because I considered it quite intimidatory. They elected not to do so. That's why I've gone a little bit further this time and gone into a bit more detail to tie things up as to what really happened and why I took the decisions I did. Now, yeah, I dealt with the silliness around non-cooperation. I went way beyond, and it would be quite embarrassing if they went down that route on their own account, because they clearly failed to follow things up that I'd given them beyond what I was asked to do. And prejudice I've dealt with prolifically around this and the perversion of it. Now let me outline to you the pertinent issues. To do this, I'll need to refer back to, again, integrity. Read my words to Hepworth. At this stage, both she and Chambers had shown, in my opinion, a lack of integrity under the do as we say, not do as we do model that the FCA deploy about integrity. That's why I've spoken about the Staley case. It was interesting to me and it really prompted me into reconsidering my own experiences. Now again, it's an endorsement of that duality of the FCA. Now move to Williams's words. It's worth noting when he was sending these emails, I'd already knew quite a bit about him and had received some feedback on his sort of character and temperament and experiences and so on. Look carefully at his words. He actively seeks to intimidate me by claiming that I have no right to discuss my concerns with either other legal parties or the court, because where we were here, let's put it into context, I had grave concerns about issues of integrity and conflicts of interest, and I'd asked for assurances on those, particularly managing this regulator-prosecutor tension, and I needed to be sure that the way evidence would be processed and treated would be done in a way that any conflicts of interest would be eliminated and there would be complete integrity to the process. And I'd never received that reassurance. And at this stage I said, well, I politely asked you to say, right, I'll help you on intelligence, but I won't assist in the legal process because I'm not comfortable with your conduct and how these issues are being managed. Now, what I said, well, okay, in that instance, I'll have to write to the court and just let them know, because he sort of said, we won't accept any of these restrictions, we'll do what we want, because in that stage, what they'd done is they pretty much told me they could take, even without a witness statement, this is where I understood it, they could take anything that I say or give them, written, whatever, and use it in whatever manner they see appropriate without my permission. I didn't at all feel comfortable with that, but given the conflicts of interest and the integrity issues. So I said, well, I'll have to write to court and make my views known. And he sought to block and intimidate that out. And the reason I'd sort of mentioned the other side, the John Dance and his representatives, you would have to do that as a matter of protocol. If you write to the court, you would have to let both sides know as well. So it wasn't an issue at all about giving evidence away at all. That was never discussed. It was nonsense. And Williams here really it sort of said his position was absolutely absurd, because I reject entirely at this point that he could do that. And furthermore, I understood that Williams was claiming that, in essence, that the FCA somehow because bear in mind, if you can take anything and use it in whatever fashion you wish without the person you sourced it from giving their opinion on whether it represents things in the correct way with integrity, I understood at that point where he was in essence saying that somehow the FCA, through FSMA, which he enjoys quoting, has some sort of extrajudiciary powers that stand above European Convention on Human Rights. And I said, well, yeah, I don't believe this would be compliant with the European Convention on Human Rights. You know, if I'm wrong, and FSMA does have these extrajudiciary powers, please show me where they are, because I can't see them. Now, you know, at this point, he couldn't do anything of the sort. He couldn't justify that position. That effectively, the way I interpret it, I was being asked to operate, or tried to be pushed to operate outside of the parameters of the European Convention on Human Rights. And he somewhat looked out of his depth, because he couldn't justify any of what he was trying to do. So I'll just take a drink. And this position started becoming extremely concerning to me. Interestingly, I'll come back to EC, European Convention on Human Rights, but it's a very, very pertinent issue in the private assets study. Very, very, very significant. Now let's refer back to the concerns of integrity. I've shown that serious issues exist over the integrity of the regulator, and also shown the conflicts of interest that reside within the model. It's also worth noting that despite Williams' fondness of the quoting the Financial Services Markets Act, you know, he was unable in the context of me seeking assurances on these quite very, very serious conflicts of interest, and how, in terms of what I was being pushed to do and what he claimed they were going to do, with or without my permission, pretty much saying that they were subject to no such limitations. There was nothing given that could suggest that they were correct in saying, yes, we comply with it in this respect. This clause, this part here, justifies us taking a senior position to the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, as I covered in the book, Lost to the Races, one concern I had was with the WealthTek service, and I'll just expand on this a little bit. Of course, I knew when the FCA moved to very belatedly place WealthTek into special administration process, with the assistance of Northumbria Police, who ironically also featured and will feature in the private assets work that will be coming out. I understood why those servers and laptops and so on were taken away, because they're obviously worried about things being deleted and so on and so forth. But given all these conflicts that I've raised, the conflicts of interest and the issues around integrity, I could see that this is clearly going to be quite a key body of evidence, and this was taken away for quite a period of time. And my concern that I had and still have today is that there's a potential within this body of evidence that could contain extensive examples of FCA malfeasance, and that takes me back to the two sides of the same coin, and these conflicts of interest in a regulator and prosecutor. Now, I sought a reassurance from the FCA that this evidence would be processed and presented with integrity. Confidential interests would be addressed, and it would be a fair, clear, just process. I never received any assurances, and I refer you back to Anthony Williams' comments on his misguided attempt that the FCA, the way I interpret it, could do what they wanted outside of, again, my interpretation of what the parameters are of the European Convention of Human Rights. I believe this to be a bit of a fallacy, but I stand to be corrected. So I still wait. Now, to conclude, don't fall into any misguided assumptions that because I've challenged the in aspects what I feared potentially could be corruption from the FCA and their conduct, that I am pro-John. I'm most certainly not. I am pro the clients and the industry. Now, in the book Lost to the Races, there's a series of videos that stated that I will not play a part in the legal proceedings of this case, and I assure you that nothing has changed there. I will not, despite whatever intimidation, threats, bullying, whatever you call it, appear for a disgraced regulator, nor would I appear for what essentially is an alleged fraudster. There's no way I would do that in either case. And I've not been idle these months and weeks, and there is a big crossover between the private assets and this case in some respects. And that position will be robustly defended. You can be assured of that. And again, if any parties believe that they can, including the FCA, threaten and intimidate me, then I would say, well, you can take that course if you choose to do so. They know where I am, and whatever you wish. If they wish to fight, then we're stacked to the rafters with material in that regard. Again, my advice would be to admit the FCA to admit their disgrace, step back from behind the perversion of prejudice, focus on humanity, work with HM Treasury, and compensate the clients that they let down, and the losses that they experience, and the financial distress that implied, and also the mental anguish. So that's really what they need to do, and that should always be the priority. Now, to wrap things up, I'm going to touch on the European Convention of Human Rights. Now, you will hear from people like Robert Jenrick, Nigel Farage, and other commentators that what they try to do is stick a lot of the failures and woes of this country on the European Rights Act. And in many ways, they're misleading you, because there isn't really that much wrong with it. And let's remember, a good many people, good many other countries follow this legislation without really much of an issue. The issue with it in Britain, and this is very, very, very pertinent to private assets, as I explained, which is where I'm going to be focusing my free time, is the perversion and duality of it in Britain. And we've seen an example of here. In certain instances, you'll get courts, be it maybe a family court, and you've got these regulators and so on who act, and often it's backed up with intimidation and extortion, with the belief that they can operate with superiority to the Human Rights Act, European Convention of Human Rights. This doesn't exist, by the way. And you will see other instances where it's perverted in such a way it's used to obstruct and do some quite absurd things. And I'll give you a couple of examples, because these are very, very pertinent to private assets. Because in essence, what the issue with private assets is, and study around there, is it's really monitoring the corruption behind taking vast amounts of public money through a process that leads that money going to privately owned agencies, usually private equity. And there are lawyers and lots of different other agencies, therapists, and so on and so forth, and that juice a lot out of it in that process. Now, if we take, for instance, immigration. Now, if you look at immigration, it's put up in a way where there's all these dangerous people coming to do terrible things and so on and so forth, and there will be some bad actors, and that has been managed very, very poorly. But there are two sides to it. One, vast majority of them are people, I guess, who want to go somewhere where they believe they can have a better life, and I think if we were in their situation, we'd do the same. There's two areas of exploitation, if you will. One would be the people who traffic them here or other places, and when they get here, they're vast freedom friendly on the processing of them, and that'll go through from social services to the lawyers who frustrate the applications to turn down asylum and so on and so forth. It's a feeding frenzy, and a lot of the agencies that are behind this feeding frenzy that sit alongside the lawyers who do very well from it are private equity owned. And the role of judges is very interesting as well, because where you get judges who take a very weird view on the European rights legislation, human rights legislation, what you will find if you look at them, they were formerly barristers and in some cases solicitors who made a fortune out of the same process. I hope I'm giving you some idea of where we're going on private assets. There is another interesting case, actually. At the moment, again, I don't subscribe to this man's politics. I don't agree with him on many things. But if you take the issue about these gangs, these rape gangs that I think Rupert Lowe is spearheading a funding campaign to launch an investigation into the failings of lots of institutions and so on and so forth, which led to it. This is very important to private assets, because effectively, if you follow the passage of some of these very vulnerable children who suffered this appalling outcome, they were in essence trafficked through this process into the hands of privately owned private equity agencies, traded a lot of money, huge amount of money taken out of the public sector to fund that. And when they've been traded, they were abandoned in terms of safeguarding. And there's a lot of this to come out in terms of private assets and the corruption behind it. It's not new. It has its legacy back in the years of Tony Blair, and it's steadily started to accelerate. And you get lots of instances where the public sector, and particularly areas around children and vulnerability, are being hollowed out, and money being sucked into private equity-owned agencies. And they want to accelerate this. This is why you're hearing more about this, because they want to use our savings to accelerate this very, very lucrative process of taking money from the public sector, putting it into the hands of private equity. Another area to watch very closely is health. Watch somebody like Wes Streeting extremely carefully. It will be presented, as it has in the past, as efficiency, unleashing the potential of the private sector, and so on and so forth. But it boils down to the same trafficking process. Money from the public sector, our money, if you like, into the hands of private equity, to be funded by our savings. That is my interest in private assets, and I'm going to be focusing more on that, and that there is crossover actually between issues that have arisen with WealthTek and the broader study on private assets. That's why I'd already knew quite a lot about the FCA, and we'd done a lot of work into that. And the FCA, for instance, were interested in their spent a lot of time looking at their linkage to the private equity industry and the legal sector. It's quite pertinent in this particular example. Right, I've gone on far longer than I should. I apologise for that. I'm not looking for volume, certainly not at this stage. But I feel that I've got a lot off my chest, and I feel like I've tied a lot of things up. And as I say, for reasons I outlined in the book and this series of videos, WealthTek was always going to be put far into the future to fund the hierarchy of greed. And it's quite sad to me it's ended up like that. But if you look at what I've written in the book, even actually down to what happened in Ukraine, the distortions of the election and so on and so forth, it has been quite accurate, I have to say. But now on to private assets. I have to focus on something different. We're sort of going to start picking this up, moving at pace, my colleagues and I, in my spare time. So I will wish you all well, and may speak to you again sometime in the future.